Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. It's time for my March 2023 reading wrap-up genre wars book battle. Hope you're excited for the battle this month. It is time to see where we're at with my favorite genres as we continue to try to count up and see exactly which genre is going to win the most for the year. We're also leading up to our annual end of the year Superbook battle. Should be fun. You can see up on the screen the books I read this month. There are actually 16 of them, so in addition to the main 15 in that picture, there's also a Henry James book, The Golden Bowl. With no further ado, though, let's go ahead and get into the genre war book battle. We've got general fiction, fantasy, mystery, thriller, crime, horror, sci-fi, classics, non-fiction, and the wild category, whatever I want to put in it. So let's start up there at the top with general fiction. This month, I read The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett. It was a buddy read with Alan over there at Big Hard Books and Classics with his YouTube channel. We had fun on Voxer, chatting back and forth as we read the book. This is the prequel to The Pillars of the Earth and World Without End, and I was very glad to get back to reading more historical fiction by Ken Follett. He does amazing world building with history, does a great job with characters. I am hopeful to make a video specifically about this book in the future, talk more about the series. I think Alan and I are going to read the next book in the series that comes after World Without End, which is A Column of Fire, probably in May, and then in September there'll be a new book released in the series. These are some mammoths, so reading this book helped me with March of the Mammoths as a readathon, but also it helps me to read more books by authors I love and to continue reading series that I've already started. The next book in general fiction, which is battling up against it, is Symphony of Secrets. This is a book by Brendan Slocum. I got it from NetGalley, so thank you to NetGalley and the publishing company. I always appreciate a free ebook. This is an interesting one. It's historical fiction with some mystery involved that has music. So it was really nice. You can tell by the title, The Symphony of Secrets, it's going to be a mystery with music in it, which is why I asked for it from NetGalley. Between these two books, I am a sucker for Ken Follett, so The Evening and the Morning is going to advance to the next level of the competition. Then we get to our fantasy genre. I read Malice by John Gwynne. That is book one of The Faithful and the Fallen. I'm a huge fan of John Gwynne. This is another mammoth. It is another author that I love. It's technically a different series than the series by John Gwynne that I have been reading with the Hunger of the Gods, the Bloodsworn series, because this is The Faithful and the Fallen, but I wanted to get to these books eventually. It is really fun fantasy. I enjoyed it a lot. It is up against The Way of Idan by Philip Chase. This is a new release from a booktuber. You know him as Dr. Fantasy, Philip Chase, PhD. Amazing YouTube channel, lots of great conversations, and he is often popping up in other people's group discussions on their channels as well. So great member of the community, a great author. I really enjoyed the book. It reads like a mix of classic fantasy, sort of like Tolkien book, and also sort of a John Gwynne type of book. So it's neat to have the comparison here in the battle against John Gwynne. Personally, I felt like the main character, Dayraven, was very D'Artagnan-esque. I liked reading it. Felt a lot like historical fiction, even though it was fantasy. A lot like a Musketeers kind of story, especially with the religious intrigue that is very much like Ken Follett with Pillars of the Earth and World Without End. Between these two, it is a tough choice. This could be a finals round, but I'm going to give the win to Philip Chase's book, The Way of Idan. My only real criticism of John Gwynne's book is, and this is true of a lot of books that start out a series, is just I personally wanted a different kind of ending. But that's just me. It's a personal preference. So The Way of Idan is advancing. The next genre is mystery, thriller, crime. It was also March Mystery Madness, so I was glad I could read some mysteries here in March. We'll start with The Postern of Fate by Agatha Christie. Christie, I was finishing up the Tommy and Tuppence series. This is book 5 in that series. It might also be one of the last books, if not the last book, that Agatha Christie actually wrote before she passed away. It is Tommy and Tuppence in their old age, and I was delighted by this book. Books 3 and 4 felt a little bit like a downgrade after book 1 and 2, but this picked it back up, made me enjoy the characters a lot more. Charming to see them in their old age with one more mystery to figure out in their new home with the library books and that sort of thing. It is up against The Black-Eyed Blonde by Benjamin Black, which is an alias. This is a book that has the classic hard-boiled detective Marlowe in it, though it was written in more recent times. It was used as the basis for the new film that came out, Marlowe, which strangely on IMDb says it came out in 2022, but I saw it in theaters here now. So as far as I could tell, it only came out in theaters maybe within the last month or so. So I don't know if IMDb is wrong or if it released earlier in other places. I don't know. But you know, I'm a sucker for reading a book and watching the film, comparing the adaptation, trying to ponder why. Why did they make the changes that they did? And it is often for cinematic pacing or to present a character in a better light or to combine characters together, that sort of thing. Or in some cases, it's a mystery and they just want the audience to have a different surprise twist or solution to what's going on. Out of these two books, I was more entertained by the Agatha Christie book. Postern of Fate gets to advance to the next level. Then we've got horror. Here we have another book where the film has just recently come out. The book was by Paul Tremblay called The Cabin at the End of the World. The film is called Knock at the Cabin. So see, they even changed the title on this one from the novel to the film. Interesting, the changes that they made here. I would argue the book was better than the film. But the film is really interesting. It goes more, without giving specific spoilers, I guess I would say more hardcore. Like, it goes heavier into the stuff than the book. But it still works. It really, really does work. The other book in this category is The Delicious Death. It's by Kayla Cottingham. That was a book I got from NetGalley. It is releasing in April. And I probably should have said that earlier with Symphony of Secrets as well. Both of these NetGalley books this month are releasing in April. But as always, thank you to the publisher and NetGalley for the ebook. I enjoyed reading this Delicious Death. It's pretty much a young adult book where the characters become what is called ghouls, but I mean, they're cannibals, to where people are turning cannibalistic. And I don't know why there are so many books now with cannibals, but it was fascinating. It was interesting. If you're into young adult zombie, ghoul, cannibal horror, then I think you would enjoy it. Between the two, though, I think The Cabin at the End of the Road by Paul Tremblay is a better book, so it's advancing. Then we get down to our second half. We've got science fiction. The Forgotten Planet by Murray Leinster. This book was from Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, which Michael K. Vaughn over there at his YouTube channel helps run for his buddy Roger. Roger is encouraging people to read free books, books that are available for free online from websites like Project Gutenberg. The idea being that anybody can join this book club and read all the books without having to pay a penny anywhere. The Forgotten Planet, classic science fiction. Michael K. Vaughn recently made a video about it, talking about how it's really one of those books where they have combined shorter stories, short stories or novellas, and put them together. And you see that a lot with classic fantasy and classic science fiction. But it worked. Human beings trying to survive against giant bugs. If that's your thing, then I would recommend the book to you. The other sci-fi book that I read, I was just trying to get another book in this month, so I went through my audiobooks and I found something that was a very short audiobook by Orson Scott Card. It's called Space Boy. I had no idea how much I was going to enjoy this. If you look online, if you read the physical book, it's 95 pages, so it's really not that long, but it is a portal fantasy, very much in the style of Stephen King's recent book Fairy Tale, or the previous book that was called Fairy Tale with fairy spelled differently by a different author, or many portal fantasies that have been written over the years. But this one's technically a science fiction portal fantasy because it's aliens from another dimension, but it's the same concept, really. The heart of the story is that this boy, his mother has died, so they believe, and he's very sad. He has a younger brother and his father, and he discovers that his mother's not really dead, that there's this alien other dimensional creature that he finds in his backyard that tells him his mom is alive in this other dimension. His mother didn't die, she just fell into another dimension. So this little boy decides he's going to try and save his mom from the other dimension. Fascinating, fun read. Between these two books, I'm going to give the win to The Forgotten Planet because the people fighting the space bugs was a little more entertaining than the short Space Boy book. Plus, Space Boy is a really generic name for a book. We then get to classics. For the classics this time, I've got The Open Book and Other Stories by Stephen Crane, where we have a fascinating situation of Stephen Crane having been a journalist and in real life having been stuck on a boat in a situation out in the open waters like this, which he uses his real life situation to inform his writing, which makes it seem all the more realistic, even though it's technically fiction. And then we also have it up against a Henry James book, The Golden Bowl, which turned out to be longer than I thought it would be. And, last month I was trying to read a lot of Henry James. I've written a short story, and I've got a character named Henry James in some of my writing that I'm working with. But man, this was not the best of Henry James's work. There are some interesting characters. It's a lot of secrecy, a lot of not just innuendo, but a lot of hinting. A lot of people telling people things without telling them things. It is fascinating, but I don't necessarily recommend it unless you're a diehard Henry James fan. In that sense, you can probably tell advancing from these two will be Stephen Crane's book, The Open Boat and Other Stories, because it had not only The Open Boat, but several other great stories by Stephen Crane. Then we get to nonfiction. The first book for nonfiction this month is something that was recommended from the Texas Speech Communication Association, which is a professional organization I'm a member of. It is called I Didn't Do the Thing Today, Letting Go of Productivity Guilt. It's by Madeline Dorr. I thought this would be a great book to read. They recommended it. As a teacher, I often feel like I can't get through everything on my to-do list. I thought maybe I suffer from this productivity guilt that this book talks about. And even though the book was informative and it had a lot of positive messages, I realized I didn't really need to listen to it. It is up against a very charming, funny book, Ron White's comedy memoir, I Had the Right to Remain Silent, but I Didn't Have the Ability. That's Ron Tater Salad White, who has funny lines in there. A lot of it is from his comedy routines, though he does have chapters with behind-the-scenes stuff. But one of my favorite lines was him saying, with the really hot weather outside, you can't leave tater salad out in the heat like that. Out of the two books, clearly I enjoyed the comedy memoir more, so Ron White's book is advancing. Then we get to the wild section. Here I've got a poetry book, The Drum That Beats Within Us, poems by Mike Bond. This is my third NetGalley book for the month, though this one is a book that was already published and was just hanging out in NetGalley. So I was able to get a free ebook. I guess looking around in the poetry section, they may have just put, instead of putting a date for it to end on NetGalley, maybe they put a certain number of people, I don't know. But I was delighted to read these poems by Mike Bond. A lot of it has nature imagery, a lot of it deals with the idea of what our purpose is in life. If you like that kind of poetry, go ahead and read it. The other book that I read this month for the wild category is a paranormal urban fantasy book. It's a new release from a booktuber. You can get it on Amazon now. It is The Lakeside Cemetery by Jessica Haas. Now, this book really should be up in fantasy, but I read too many fantasy novels this month. Jessica Haas, this is her debut novel. She is on YouTube as Jess the Book Freak. You may be familiar with her channel. You may have seen her do some funny skits over there on her channel. Or maybe you've watched her videos where she talks about writing her journey as an author as she is working on her stuff. I really enjoyed the book. The main character is a college age barista working, just trying to get by. It deals with friendship, deals with the idea of family and romantic love in this paranormal urban fantasy situation. So I highly recommend it if you enjoy that type of book. And out of these two, it is advancing. Even though I really like the Mike Bond poetry, it's always hard to pair poetry up against something else. We now have our winners. Let's go ahead and go back up to the top. We have ended up with The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett, some amazing historical fiction, up against The Way of Idan by Philip Chase, which is a new fantasy novel that feels like a mix of classic fantasy and historical fiction. So another tough call, but I'm going to let what may be my subconscious bias for Philip Chase give his book the win here. Ultimately, The Evening and the Morning had some weaknesses at the beginning. The book is divided into 4 parts. The first part, I really did not like Regna, the character that is clearly set to become the main character in the book. It wasn't really until the end of that section, beginning of part 2, that I started to like that character, and I view that as a big weakness in The Evening and the Morning, so I am happy to give this win to The Way of Idan, a book in which I was enjoying what was going on from the very beginning, connecting with the characters. So Philip Chase, in that instance, did a better job of getting me to care about the protagonist. The next pairing, we've got our mystery thriller Crime with Agatha Christie, Tommy and Tuppence, Book 5, Postern of Fate, up against an interesting horror suspense story, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Of these 2 books, I feel like Paul Tremblay does a better job as an author of having a message there. That there is a clear theme, a clear metaphorical concept going on with The Cabin at the End of the World. And I think it comes down to asking yourself, what do you as an individual sacrifice for society? In order for society to continue on, for people in general to feel like they can live in a normal, happy world, what part of yourself do you give up, or are you willing to give up for others? It's a really fascinating concept. Goes back to the age-old debate of individual versus society, but to me that was the core message that ends up being the line through the book. So The Cabin at the End of the World is winning that pairing. Then we get to The Forgotten Planet by Murray Leinster, the science fiction from Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, up against The Open Boat and Other Stories by Stephen Crane. As I was saying earlier, Stephen Crane has 4 really good, impactful, powerful stories in here, which is better than the mashup that became The Forgotten Planet. Though I am a sucker for those Forgotten Realms, Forgotten World, Forgotten Planet kind of stories, which made me like that book from the get-go. But Stephen Crane's book, very realistic fiction, is getting the win here. You can tell that Stephen Crane has based his writing in reality, and that I think makes it all the more powerful. Then we've got our last set here in quarterfinals. Ron White's comedy memoir, I Had the Right to Remain Silent, but I Didn't Have the Ability, up against Jessica Haas's new book, The Lakeside Cemetery. At the end of the day, as I weigh these 2, partly I'm influenced by the fact that I have already seen all of Ron White's comedy specials, and so a lot of his book, which I was hoping would be more stories from the road, more of his life, a lot of it I already knew. A lot of it, I was like, yeah, I know these jokes, I know these situations. So I'm going to give the win here very easily to Jessica Haas's book, giving me something new and fresh with twists and turns that I was not able to predict. With these winners, we now can look at our semifinalists for the month, March 2023. We have ended up with what feels like epic fantasy, a new release from Philip Chase, book 1 of a trilogy. It's The Way of Idan. Then we have in horror suspense, a very psychological book, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, the basis for the film Knock at the Cabin. And in the second half of semifinals, representing the classics with realistic fiction, Stephen Crane's short story collection, The Open Boat and Other Stories. Finishing off semifinals with new author Jessica Haas, The Lakeside Cemetery. It is paranormal or supernatural urban fantasy. Powerful semifinals. Let's see what's advancing to finals. Back up to the top, The Way of Idan by Philip Chase up against The Cabin at the End of the World. Both of these are fantastic reads. I highly recommend both of them. I'm gonna give the win to the fantasy book though, The Way of Idan by Philip Chase. It was a delight getting to know the Day Raven character, the bond he has with his best friend as they go out on their journey me. And I don't want to give specific spoilers, but I love stories like The Three Musketeers or Pillars of the Earth, World Without End, that have the church set up, that have all these different officials in it, and some of the people in the church are corrupt and they're all about power and temptation. And then there are other people who they are working at political odds with one another, the political intrigue and all of that. That is done very well in The Way of Edon. So I thought that was very nice. It's advancing to the finals. Our other semifinals pairing, The Open Boat and Other Stories by Stephen Crane up against Jennifer Haas's book, The Lakeside Cemetery. I must just have fantasy in my heart this month, but I'm going to promote Jessica Haas's book on up to finals as well. Again, interesting characters. Not just the main character, the barista here, Cara, however you pronounce her name, Cara, but her friends who tag along with her as well. Again, I don't want to give you spoilers, but the supernatural characters that get involved, they're intriguing as well. So we end up with a finals round that definitely will be won by the genre of fantasy this month. We don't even need to worry about that. Question is, it's also definitely going to be won by a booktuber, either Dr. Fantasy, Philip Chase, or Jess the Book Freak, Jessica Haas. So here we have The Way of Edon up against The Lakeside Cemetery. They're also both really debut novels. Wow. Without realizing it, we've ended up with a lot of coincidences here for these two books. It is a tough decision to make, but at the end of the day, I did enjoy The Way of Edon a little bit more than The Lakeside Cemetery. So Philip Chase's book is gonna win Best Read of March 2023 here for me. But I do highly recommend them both. If you are one of those people who likes to go out of your way to support booktubers, author tubers, then I would recommend you get both books. Give them both a try. Let's go ahead and slot in The Way of Edon for our end of the year super book battle. Go ahead and put that down there. And I guess it's time for me to put some final reflections out there. As always, I encourage your comments down below. What were you rooting for? What were you hoping would win this month? How might you have made the decisions differently along the way? And also, of course, reading recommendations for the future. We've got April coming up. April has Continuathon with the goal of continuing series that you've read. And then we have May coming up with Horror Mayhem. What do you recommend people read for Continuathon? What series out there do you think people should read and or continue? And for Horror Mayhem, what horror do you recommend? And it could be horror of different genres. I would appreciate that. I did post on Instagram where I'm putting together piles of books that I think could work for Continuathon and Horror Mayhem. But if you have more recommendations for things that fit under different genres for horror, I would appreciate that, because if it's horror or fantasy or sci-fi horror or non-fiction books about horror or anything like that, I would be happy to read those. Maybe historical fiction that has horror elements to it. You can also put comments down below about your own reading. All of that is welcome, of course. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. Every day is a good day for a book talk or a book battle. Peace.